Hi, everyone. I'm U.S. Attorney Janine Ferris-Pirro here in the nation's capital, Washington, D.C., with a weekly wrap-up. Here's the weekly case update. Sentences of note. A 19-year-old man was sentenced to 14 years in prison for carjacking two vehicles at gunpoint between Christmas and New Year's. When police apprehended this guy, he and his accomplice were found armed with an illegal ghost gun and another weapon with its serial number removed. Shock. A former U.S. Postal Service letter carrier and D.C. resident was stripped of his naturalized citizenship and sentenced to 66 months in federal prison for masterminding a mail theft and bank fraud scheme that illegally pocketed $1.6 million. The defendant was naturalized as a U.S. citizen in May 2022. His scheme ran from December 2020 to March 2023. On his citizenship application, he falsely claimed to U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services that he had no prior criminal history, but upon completing his sentence, he faces deportation. A 27-year-old man was sentenced to 66 months for distribution of 26 grams of crack cocaine and the illegal possession, of course, of a semi-automatic pistol. He was arrested for these offenses while he was on pretrial release for already carrying a loaded pistol without a license. And a 34-year-old felon was sentenced to 65 months in prison for stealing a car, crashing it into a parked vehicle. During his arrest, he discarded a loaded Glock, he fled, and then punched the officer in the face. He has a prior conviction for guns and drug possession. A 43-year-old former FAA contractor was sentenced to 12 months in federal prison for acting as an Iranian intelligence agent in the U.S. He sought sensitive information on the U.S. aviation sector, as well as open source and non-public data on the solar energy industry. The contractor operated as an Iranian spy for nearly 7 years, from December 2017 to June 2024. Charges and arrests. This week, my office seized over 300,000 kilograms of chemicals used to manufacture methamphetamine. These precursor chemicals originated in China and were destined for clandestine labs in Mexico controlled by the violent Sinaloa drug cartel. The operation marks the largest ever U.S. law enforcement seizure of methamphetamine production chemicals. And to put this into context, it will take 24 18-wheelers to transport the barrels of chemicals to a secure storage facility. Because President Trump and Secretary Rubio declared the Sinaloa cartel a foreign terrorist organization, we can now strike faster and hit harder, and that's just what we did. And in another seizure, my office filed a civil forfeiture complaint to recover $868,000 in stolen cryptocurrency. The perpetrators ran multiple confidence scams targeting victims in D.C., Texas, Illinois, and Florida. The victims were directed to a website to open cryptocurrency accounts that were ultimately controlled by the scammers. One victim alone was defrauded of $1.3 million by these bad actors. And 7 alleged members of a D.C.-based drug trafficking organization were arrested by FBI agents and indicted following a year-long investigation. The FBI deployed agents in parts of D.C., Maryland, and California to round up the suspect in early morning raids. 18 firearms were seized, including an AR-style rifle, a shotgun, a Draco-style pistol. And agents also recovered a pill press commonly used to manufacture fentanyl pills, 2 kilograms of suspected narcotics, and more than 50 grand in cash. And a 32-year-old convicted felon was charged with illegally possessing a Glock 17 loaded with 1 round in the chamber and 22 additional 9mm bullets in the magazine. Police discovered the firearm during a traffic stop for expired tags. The defendant failed to provide valid registration and insurance, leading officers to impound the vehicle. He, of course, has prior convictions for burglary, and he's a felon in possession of a firearm. And a 42-year-old district man was arrested at San Francisco International Airport and charged with possessing and distributing child sexual abuse materials. Materials included images and videos of prepubescent children. This case is a part of Project Safe Childhood, a nationwide initiative launched by the Department of Justice to combat the epidemic of child sexual exploitation and abuse. And as for guilty pleas, a 17-year-old pleaded guilty to shooting over 15 rounds into an elementary school playground and committed 2 armed carjackings. He's charged as an adult under Title 16, and he faces sentencing on November 14th. The shooting stemmed from an online dispute with a rival, resulting in one victim suffering a gunshot wound to the forehead and a fractured skull. And a 43-year-old woman pleaded guilty to wire fraud for defrauding $1.5 million in economic injury disaster loans from the U.S. government. As founder of Next Level Partners, LLC, she falsely certified that the loan funds would be used for business expenses, but instead used the money for cryptocurrency speculation and personal ventures. Sentencing is scheduled for December 9th, and she is required to repay the stolen funds. And a 36-year-old man pleaded guilty to second-degree murder while armed and assault with a dangerous weapon for a shooting that killed one man and wounded another. The plea carries a sentencing range of 18 to 33 1/3 years, with sentencing set for November 18th. The shooting occurred after police responded to gunshots where 2 victims were found. One later died at the hospital. The other survived with light injuries. And a 24-year-old man pleaded guilty to second-degree murder for a drive-by shooting that killed a 29-year-old Joshua White. The incident involved the defendant and an accomplice switching vehicles to avoid detection before returning to shoot White at a Shell gas station. Sentencing is scheduled for October 24th. And today, my office announced the arrest of 2 individuals in the shooting death of 21-year-old intern Eric Tarpinian Jackham. Eric was a student in college who was working in Congress for the summer. He went out one evening around 10:28 p.m. on June 30th and was shot 4 times and murdered. This case involved 2 long guns and a 9mm, where there were 79 rounds that were found on the ground near Eric. And unfortunately, this is the reality of what's going on in D.C., and it's why President Trump is trying to make D.C. safe and beautiful again. This was a coordinated effort by my office, the Metropolitan Police Department, and our federal partners, both the FBI as well as the United States Marshals. So we continue to fight the fight for you and to make our nation's capital safe. God bless and thank you.